You're watching BCTV. We're all about Branford. You're watching BCTV, Branford Government Television, a service of Branford Community Television. This program is brought to you in part through the support of the town of Branford.
Okay, since it looks like everyone's here, I will call this meeting of the Branford Planning Zoning Commission to order. It is Thursday, October 26, 2023. I have 7:01 p.m. This is a special meeting. There is one item on the agenda, and that is Shirley McCarthy, Peter Henschel, the applicants for a zoning regulation amendment, adding definitions to section 2.2 and extensively revising section 6.3, the landscaping section, and adding a new subsection section to section 6.113 regarding fencing and redesignating appendixes. So this is our deliberation section on the proposed landscaping amendments. I will introduce members of the commission and staff here this evening. Joe Chadwick, are you here?
Joe Chadwick is present.
Thank you, Joe. Fred Russo. Fred, are you here?
Fred Russo is here.
Joe Biuzzo. Joe, are you here?
Joe is here.
Thanks, Joe. Marcy Pelusi. Marcy, are you here?
Marcy's here.
And I believe Sharon, an alternate, is also here. Sharon Hutner. I understand I see you here. And I think, as Harry explained, that assuming everyone listened to all the hearings and listened to the tapes, if you missed any, then it would just be, it's a deliberation, so it would be the 5 regular members. I am Chuck Anders, chair. Our staff this evening is our town planner, Harry Smith. Also, I believe somewhere in the background is our clerk recording secretary, Michelle Martin. So no public hearings, just deliberations on the landscaping regs. I guess the first thing is, do we need to clarify for the record that everyone has listened to all the public hearings? Harry, was that an issue?
Harry Smith, town planner. We went through that, but I think we should clarify. I believe Marcy missed a meeting on the 6th of July. And you've listened to that, I believe, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Okay.
I think there was anything else. I think the record has been forwarded to the commission in its entirety with a Dropbox link. So I don't recall any specific documents that were presented, but I think they were displayed. So you've seen the visual recording, you've seen everything, Marcy, right? Yeah. Okay. That was it.
Okay. And the reason we're having a special session just for this one is we wanted to devote some attention to it. And I kind of put this in a couple sort of big categories. One is big picture issues, what that's about, and do we have concerns about that? And then there's a lot of detail in terms of a lot of text revisions to the text. And my thought is, I don't know if we, if we want to start looking at, the definitions and revisions to definitions and so forth, maybe we need to get a better, sense of that we're good with it, or that we like it or we don't like it before we start, wrestling with the individual stuff. So anyway, that was my thinking. Harry, did you have any thoughts one way or the other?
No, that sounds fine to me. Hopefully I can be helpful. In terms of proceeding, I can put a copy of the document as it's been revised now several times up on the screen. One thing that was not in the Dropbox, we had a little trouble printing everything out, were the comments from Commissioner Chadwick. So I can put those up because we might as well have to go through one version or another. We might as well, same time, have those on the screen as well, if that makes sense. So, I mean, I did prepare, it was a brief 1.5-page summary document. I think everyone's probably fairly familiar with it, but if you want me to go over that, which sort of hits the highlights of the proposed changes. But I think Commission's probably heard that before. And if you want to just dive into the document and go from start to finish.
Well, why don't
Okay,
you
good to go.
start with the summary? I mean, how long will
Okay.
that, because that'll give us a sort of handle on the big picture, and
Sure.
then we can dive. So, I mean, does that sound good for everyone else? I don't want to, other commission members, any thoughts? Fred?
I'm good with it, the way you want to do it.
Okay, Joe Chadwick?
No, I think we need some order, and it sounds like you've got a good sort of way to chunk it down, so we should proceed.
Okay, Marcy?
I'd like to start with the general and then get more specific.
Okay.
Okay.
Great. Joe Bayuzo, same. You're good with that?
Yes, same.
Okay, great. So we'll go with the general. So the main objectives, maybe you can start with that, Harry.
Sure. So I'm going to share my screen. Hopefully everyone can see the summary document here. We'll move that over. I can't really. There we go. I'll leave it here. So just going through what's proposed, essentially, there were several definitions proposed. Some of them include references to documents that really I don't think were intended to be part of the regulations at all. But all these are in the definition section. So we had a definition for canopy tree, critical root zone, diameter breast height, endangered species of plant, invasive plants, landscaping as a term itself, limited disturbance line, native trees and plants, noteworthy significant trees, and threatened plants. The overall, what I pulled out is the highlights, if you will, the general broad brush strokes of what's proposed and changes to the section 6.3 regarding landscaping. We're basically adding to the purpose section, beginning of 6.3, that a goal of the regulations was to increase human and wildlife benefits by increasing natives. Also proposed is a preparation of an existing vegetation plan to identify significant trees have a diameter breast height of 12 inches or more. I mean, this is currently required in the regulations, though, and has been provided. There's another category that's proposed here of noteworthy trees. At the beginning, it was all trees of between 8 and 12 inches, but that's been since modified to narrow it down to between 10 and 12 inches. There is also a proposal to relax front yard landscaping requirements for several special exception uses in the residential zone. I think as time has gone on and some uses like two families were added to the special exception category, we sort of ran into situations where there were plantings in front of particularly an older structure is being converted to a two family, and maybe you had a narrow distance between the structure and the street, and you had some desired plantings by the property owner along the building, and then 5 feet away you had to have a landscaping strip, and it really didn't make any sense to have that. We've, I think, exempted several two-family uses. I sort of looked at whether some of the yard requirements made sense, and there's a proposal in there to exempt what's listed here and several others that were added, I think, during the public hearing process by the applicant as things to be exempt from that requirement. I think we discussed going beyond that a little bit, possibly with rear and side yard landscaping exemptions for some of these uses as well. We can get to that later. Was also some clarifications and enhancements proposed of requirements for landscaping plans, including identification of areas of invasive plants, showing a limited disturbance or limited, construction line, which is often on site plans, but not always on landscaping plans. A requirement that at least 75% of each of the various types here of proposed landscaping elements be of native species, with the remainder allowed to be non-competing exotic species. D is a requirement for replacement trees for removal of significant and noteworthy trees. We've talked about this quite a bit during the public hearing process, and there is a proposal in here for basically a way to relax that requirement for sites that are very heavily forested of a certain size. There are also additional requirements regarding protection of significant trees in terms of, we had the drip line as even the standard reference in the current regulations, and have added a critical root zone as another way to look at what's the area beyond the trunk that should be protected. And also adding protection of noteworthy trees and threatened or endangered species to that. There is also additional guidance provided in here about appropriate tree and shrub planting underneath overhead power lines. I think we've been considering this in approval of landscaping plans. This formalizes that, or would formalize it. And guidelines also speak more directly, I think, to screening of certain elements and site development with landscaping or other features. There are also proposed clearer, more precise parking lot requirements, particularly for intermediate islands and islands at ends of rows, depending on the size of the parking lot proposed. And item I is a proposal of some clarifications regarding suitable types of ground cover outside of planting beds, paved areas, and buildings. And again, some specific standards for larger parking lots. Item 6, recommends a removal. It's a recommendation, not a requirement, of invasive plants, and provide some guidance on how to dispose of them properly. It's a reference material. There is also a requirement regarding ongoing maintenance of landscaping. It's been kind of took the standard condition that the commission's been putting on applications really for years now and codifying that into the regs. So this really came from me because we've been doing that, and it's just a way to enshrine that so we don't have to put it as a condition on every approval. There is also an appendix proposed regarding landscaping terminology, explanatory graphics. I think some of that was removed by the applicant, and also redesignating the appendices in general. We've had one for solar energy, we've got a couple others, and this would really identify them by letter and straighten out their identification so it's clear. With respect to section 613, there is a proposal to prohibit use of razor or barbed wire. There's also a clarification proposed regarding the requirements for fence approval on commercial properties that are already the subject of a site plan of special exception approval, and a section requiring maintenance of fences. Do you want to generally go back to some of these and talk about them further, or how do you want to go from here?
I think we should get a sense from the commission. That's good, to sort of the general things. What I put them in like 3 or 4 categories. Some are, I would say relatively uncontroversial, cleanup of things, or recommendation, or even they're new, like clarifying the parking lot or whatever, that I didn't hear a lot of objections to, and I could be fine with. That would be helpful. That's sort of one, and that's a significant amount of them. There are a few that were more controversial. One in the 2 big ones that came. Well, one of them is the requirement on the whole invasive species, and the invasive, recommending the removal of invasive. That's one thing, but it's the native, non-native species. That I think the 75% requirement that the new landscaping be native, and I didn't. That was one area I'd love to hear people think if that's a good, what our sense was. I know we've done that, and we recommended it as a matter of course in a lot of our applications. And there's typically no objection, because if they got to do it anyway, they'll make them. I don't hear a lot of developer objections, although occasionally I've heard Marcy comment, with raised eyebrows. So I would want to explore that issue. That seems like a subject for debate. And a larger subject for debate is the idea of the replacement of significant and what's the other category of trees for undeveloped property. In other words, that's a major change, I think, where if you have, an undeveloped wooded property and it has a number of significant trees on that you need to replace them, even though you're developing the site. I mean, that is, that gets in, and there was a carve out in that. It's to limit it to, sites with 4 acres and so forth. But that whole subject is something that I think is worth talking about. And when I understood they were mostly, when I looked at the public comment, there were a lot of general recommendations in favor. Some of them were specific about removing invasives, and but there was the opposition. So, and some of it was just general. We support this. The value of trees and so forth, and was sort of generalized speaking in favor. The opposition from the economic development site was more of this would be onerous for new developments. We don't have that much left, and it would be too onerous. And I geared that towards this provision in particular, not so much the whole set in itself. So that was a big issue, that kind of comment, and that could be addressed whether we like it or not. We could take what it is. We could delete the section and just adopt the rest of it, or not adopt the rest of it, or we could tweak it even more. So that was a big one. And then the other one you mentioned is about how we're writing the exclusions for some of that's the thing that has come up. Because this applies to all special exceptions, and when you have residential special exceptions, particularly for accessory structures, and all of a sudden we have to have landscape areas both in the side and the rear, and how we apply that, and you would refer to that. So that was my take of what these things did. So my take was, a lot of it is a good cleanup. It's more information, that it's maybe substantively more, particularly for commercial developments. My general sense is that if you're doing a major commercial development now and you're spending a lot of money, then this isn't going to add a whole lot of more costs, except maybe if I'm pulling out the development of the significant trees, preserving all significant trees, and how that applies to undeveloped property. So anyway, that's sort of my view of the world on this. Let's go around maybe and get some other thoughts. Fred, do you want to start since you're?
Can I jump in quickly? Just
sure,
sorry to interrupt.
Yep,
one thing I did not mention is that as you're familiar with the regulations as they currently exist, we have this provision to allow modifications of the regulations for excellence in landscape design.
Right.
My understanding is that, and I'm not an attorney, so you should feel free to jump in, Chuck. My understanding of the McKenzie decision, I know there's been subsequent case law, is that kind of general provision to allow, without any specific criteria, the modification of standards in the zoning regulations is no longer supported by case law, let's say. And I think my understanding of the rationale was that there is a statutory body empowered to grant modifications to requirements in the zoning regulations, and that's the Zoning Board of Appeals. And that is where those kind of questions should go. And I understand it's been maybe modified a little bit, but I understand you still need specific criteria. It's like almost like an A and a B. If this situation is this, then you can have a different standard, but you can't have some kind of general ability to relax the standard completely or in any fashion the commission chooses. Do I have
Thanks,
that right?
Larry. That's correct. I mean, that's another thing we can talk about as well.
Yeah.
I mean, what to me that highlighted, because we've used it several
Yeah.
times. We used it excellence in landscape design when frankly I think that was a stretch. There wasn't excellent. We just did it because we didn't think at what we liked. What they did was appropriate given the circumstances, given the where the buildings were now and everything else. They just didn't have the space to do it.
Yeah.
And I mean, but if we take it out, then we're either making get a variance, which there's no legal hardship for, or something. So anyway, that's another thing to put in.
Yeah, that highlights that exclusion of, what uses in a residential zone the yard requirement should not apply to. It just highlights
Right.
that.
Yeah, that's another reason why we need to do that. So anyway, that's another category. So
Sorry to interrupt. I just want to make sure that was on the table.
absolutely. But let's sort of go around any big picture items. Let's do a round and see what people are focusing on, and then we'll go from there. So I think Fred, I picked on you since I see your picture next to mine. So
Okay, no problem. I actually do have a lot of questions and concerns. And I would like to talk in general, not about anyone specifically, because I think we're going to end up doing that anyway, but just this has been a very long process. It goes back to, I think, June, maybe even earlier than that. And I think I was happy to see that there were not a lot of questions asked by the commissioners because it allowed the applicants to really and truly make their case. And I know I'm one of those guys that always has something to say, and I really held back because I wanted to make sure that whatever I heard correctly, and it wasn't jaded in any way by any other comments. But the first thing I would talk, and I would say this to any regulation, by the way, but we're talking about landscape regulations, so it's going to apply to this. One of the things that I questioned was these proposed revisions and new regulation and changes. Are they based on wants or are they based on needs? And I'm just leaving that out there. I'm not saying it is or it isn't. I'm just saying that was one of the thoughts that came across my mind. There's been no public outcry. We haven't had lots of letters coming into the commission or coming before the commission saying, hey, the landscape, either whether it was by developers or property owners or whatever. And so I'm just wondering what was the motivation to have these landscape proposed landscape changes being made. One of the things that was mentioned in part of the testimony by the applicants was that, and I think if I'm not mistaken, it was Mr. Maresca asked the question: were landscape architects consulted? Were architects consulted? Were builders consulted? He had a laundry list of names. And I think the answer was basically no, which means that the changes have been developed. I don't want to say in a vacuum because I'm sure they went to other sources, but it would have been nice to know that people who would be mostly affected by a change, and I don't care how small it is, because for one person the change is small, for someone else it's major. And so I think the more opinions you have on any of the changes, whatever they are, it's better to have more people involved than fewer people involved. And I don't think that was the case. I also got the feeling that the way the regulations or proposed regulations were presented, that it really targeted commercial property owners, or developers, I should say, not property owners. And although I know residential developments are included, because of their size, it almost seems inconsistent. It seems inconsistent that if you have a significant tree on a 1 acre lot, and for whatever its value is, I don't know what it was, good value or bad value, it seems inconsistent to pick on the developer, maybe because there's more trees. But it just seemed to me that if it's a significant tree or a noteworthy tree, whether it's on a one-family lot or it's on a commercial property, it should all have the same value. Because then what happens is what we're doing is we're selectively saying, hey, if you got a commercial piece of property, these are the rules that apply to you. But if you have one single lot of property, it doesn't apply to you. And to me, that doesn't make sense. If we're really concerned about invasive species, we're concerned about the size of trees being removed, then it should be for all the trees on all the properties not specifically for commercial. Now, if you're going to make it for commercial only, then you have to ask, how does it affect developers? Will this be a good thing or a bad thing? It seems to me that one of the regulations being proposed could be very cumbersome, and it could be very expensive for the town as well. To go in there and have to qualify which tree is which, where it is, where it's located. Should we have a fund to it just seems like it's kind of out of hand. It's over the top. I think that the regulation becomes very, very far reaching. And I think the town's going to have to be responsible to make sure how many trees are there and did the developer do it. We're just going to put a lot of extra work on our planning and zoning staff and resources when I don't know, maybe I'm thinking, kind of in a simplistic manner, but at least in the old days, landscaping was, you do a design, you landscape the lawns, the shrubs, everything else. But to go in there and do a sort of pre-study of what's on the land and what could be removed and what can't be removed, and there may even be penalties for removing something or additional costs. That to me doesn't seem fair. And so what I look at it is this: I absolutely agree that we want to have responsible development in our town. Okay. But I think the word that was never mentioned, that it should be responsible and balanced. That what is good for a commercial lot may not be good for other elements in the town. It may not be good for the developer. I think we're extremely lucky to have a very, very we have a staff of commissioners and town planners and assistant town planners, 2 architects, two business people, a landscape architect, an attorney. We have a pretty good mix of people so that when an issue comes up before our town, and I think you mentioned yourself, Chuck, yeah, I think we have the ability to solve those problems. And what I don't want to see us do is bring regulations on board that those who are going to be directly affected have had no input into this thing. And I think in the end, some of these regulations are just over the top. They're going to burden a developer in particular, but I think it also burdens other members that we don't see. When a developer comes into town and puts up a building or buildings, whatever it's going to be, it increases the tax rate for the town. It does affect taxpayers, especially elderly or people on fixed incomes, that their taxes don't go up. And if we're going to have a set of regulations that limits that or prohibits that, or maybe even supersedes or existing regulations, that you might have to take landscaping regulations first and say you've got to meet this criteria first before we were going to look at the other stuff. And I think that's not the order of business that it should be. I think it's important. I don't want to see us cut down a tree if we don't have to, but I think overall, I've been on the commission for 10 years. I've done a lot of listening and viewing. And it seems to me that once the project has been approved, that project, and again, we're going to just talk about landscaping in this case. There's other things that are the same as well. But when it's done, the projects look pretty good. They come out pretty good. Are they exactly the way a particular group wanted them or a certain resident? No, but our responsibility is to the town. And so that goes back to my thing about wants and needs. There are certain needs that people of our town, they would want, but is it a necessity? Do we have to have those things that maybe take a segment of our town development and put it on the back burner? Someone says, why should I be here? I gotta do all this extra work, spend all this extra money. And so I don't see that. I think, what I'm looking at is, and I'm saying is, I agree with responsible development, but I think it also has to be balanced development. And the balancing act is the commission, the town, the planning and zoning staff office. It's the residents. It's the developers. It's real estate agents. That makes it all inclusive. And the regulation isn't for sort of this particular kind of a development. In my opinion, it's really not fair. It's not all encompassing. It almost targets a commercial property and saying you have to be held to a higher standard. Listen, if there's a lot next to me that has a lot of trees on it, but it gets a pass because it's a single lot, that's not right. It's not right to the regulations. It's not right for us to have to look and know that one person, a developer, there's a set of rules and regulations for him or her, and yet there's another set of regulations because your lot is smaller. So I have problems with the way the changes were being proposed. I don't think enough people were involved in it. Even those who came on board and said they were in favor was a handful. I don't think it was 3 or 4 people that we got letters or comments from. And I would expect that. I think when you're making a proposal, you tell your friends that if you support this, and I think they do that, which is fine. But I just didn't see an outcry of anybody thinking that these were such great regulations being proposed. And so that's kind of my issue. And I would say one last thing. I know I'm taking a lot of time. I think what really convinced me more than anything was when our economic development director, Mr. Perry, made his presentation. At the end of the presentation, he presented a document from Scroggs. And I learned a lot about Scroggs. I was on a bus trip with him. I was on a 4-hour Zoom meeting with him. They're a real good bunch of people. They really, truly, I thought that, getting involved with these meetings and much of it, they were absolutely terrific. Okay, I have a much stronger liking to what they do. And Mr. Maresca had a document saying that Scroggs was not in favor of the regulations, at least as they were written. And one of the people who proposed it said, "Oh, wait a minute! I made a phone call to Scroggs, and the director said this is this." I thought it was disingenuous to make that statement. Here's an economic development director of the town with a document from a state agency saying they're not such good regulations, paraphrasing it, and someone proposing it. That's kind of not true. In my opinion, it was hearsay, saying that you made a phone call, you talked to the director, he was surprised that someone on his staff would do that. That might have been a very private conversation. It may all be true, but we have no proof that it was ever made, it was ever documented or whatever. And that was the thing for me that was the straw that broke the camel's back. I said, you want to make proposals, that's fine. They're debated, they're discussed, they're added to, they're subtracted from. But the debate's something that comes from even a higher agency, the Scroggs, and then say it's not really true because I talked to the director. I don't know what that really meant and what we're supposed to do. But for me, that put the kibosh on wanting to support these proposed landscape amendments. So that's my opinion.
Thanks, Fred. What we're going to do, we'll go around and then we can have further discussion, but give everyone a shot to do at least an opening comments. Joe Chadwick, thoughts?
Yeah, I personally, I think the concept of this is really, really important. I am also kind of afraid that the language tends to be more aspirational than necessarily actionable. I say that having back at the turn of the millennia when I was still working for Yale, we were involved in a big conversion process, and we would have these procedures that had to be based on policies. So the policy is the general thing. The procedure is the detailed, actionable things that make it happen. I'm not finding the development of a lot of actionable things in this. And I would hate this to be pushed on the wayside or sour for lack of an actionability, because I think there's too much important basic material in this piece of writing. I'm not particularly concerned with developers being forced to do too much, from the standpoint that a developer comes in, they know what their exposure is, the relative cost of a few trees, Chuck alluded to this a little while ago, is not that much in terms of the big picture. What is important, though, for developers is to have a clear path, no opportunities for towns to take second bites at the apple. you want to have certainty, you want to be able to budget, you want to have everybody have a clear scope for the design professionals, and just sort of march and just narrow down the issues and arrive at a point. That's the design, and that's it. We're all in agreement. I feel there's so much mushy territory in this that we may be hurting ourselves. I think that a fair amount more development needs to occur, and I don't think we're going to be able to edit that tonight. But that's pretty much my feeling. It's just, you know, I think this is too important to sort of push through with patches. We need to like really sort of get back down into the meat of the editing of this.
Thanks, Joe. Anything else?
That's it for now.
Great. Thanks, Joe. Okay, Joe Bayuzo, comments?
I have a few comments, but I'm listening to Fred. I like some things that Fred is saying. I also like some things that Joe just said, and I'm really concerned about what Mr. Maresca was saying. He brought up some good points too when he was talking. I have a question, not so much a concern, but if there's a plot of land that's going to be developed and it's a wooded land, and there's X amount of, let's say there's 10 trees there that are significant that have to come down. What are we saying as far as replacement? We're talking about one-to-one replacement, or I don't understand how that. I don't understand what you're asking for them to do, and I'm a little bit concerned about the 75%. Call it not invasive, but
Native, yeah.
I couldn't get the native plants, because even though a plant may not necessarily be native to this area, but it is very compatible to our zone. Not a bad thing. What I'm concerned about is invasive plants. Invasive plants are the ones that we should be more concerned about, not something that's native or not native here, even though it grows well. Any plants that grow in a different area, but they have the same type of weather that we have, same zone, and do well, and there's nothing wrong with that. I don't see a problem with that. But I just like to know how many trees, if they find significant, that get torn down, are they supposed to replace them all, or just what are we saying about that? I really didn't hear too much about that. Those are my concerns. A lot of what Fred and Joe said, they've already said it, so I don't need to repeat it. Thank you.
Thanks, Joe. And we may get into the details. Your question about replacement of significant trees, we'll get into that, but we want to do each of us around. I know Marcy likes to listen to everyone go last. So Marcy, you're last. So what do you got to say? I'd love to hear from you.
I'm going to try to go slow and methodically, because when I get going, I get really emotional and my voice goes up, and I don't want to come across overly anxious. But, I have to tell you, I've gotten very anxious about the way this has all transpired. And I've given it a lot of thought today, and I really spent the whole day listening, writing notes, reading the regulations, trying to figure out what has me so troubled. And I think what it really comes down to is, I was trained as a landscape architect. I've worked in the industry for over 30 years. I've worked with developers, and now I'm seeing, well, I won't get specific yet, and everything that the intent of this is what I want to believe. I think we should be eliminating all invasives. I think we should be promoting native trees. But when I go through this regulation, there's a couple of things that I think have been bothering me for a long time, and this seems like the perfect venue to maybe just vet them a little bit. A project comes along, there's a survey done. I think the regulations that in here we're trying to get more detail with regard to the landscape are good. Surveyors don't tend to draw the canopy at the right diameter. That's a pet peeve of mine because it distorts the impact on the site. And oftentimes I see surveys come in that are at 100 scale or too small or at an orientation that don't facilitate my work to effectively drill down and show detail and articulate areas. And I'm often having to correct those things to get the level of detail that I think these regulations are trying to anticipate. But I don't think that we can anticipate, I don't think that we can promote innovation from our professionals if we're treating every situation we see being, a plot of land and requiring them to do a side yard, a rear yard, a side yard. That I think everything has to be done on a case-by-case basis. And as general as it sounds, we have to have faith in the landscape architect to promote what we were trained to do, which is to be stewards of the land and to understand the intent of what the town is trying to accomplish, which is to protect trees, to promote the pollinator pathways, right? And these are goals and objectives or policies, as Joe Chadwick mentioned, that I think apply to all of the town. And because there's this need to be specific, to protect ourselves from a legal standpoint. Oh, I can feel my face getting hot. I'm sorry. To protect ourselves from a legal standpoint, to justify ourselves, to be able to try to be, consistent with developers so that there's, consistency across our town. We get into this sort of myopic approach, which I think really hems in the designer and the opportunities and prevents future design. One specific scenario is, you're trying to protect trees. I've seen many grading plans that if they introduced a wall or a living wall, you could protect more trees. This is the kind of thinking that a landscape architect's going to present. But what happens is, and I've seen it on application, there's no landscape architect. I'm getting excited, I'm sorry. There's no landscape architect that's required to be there. So, I first and foremost want to see every plan that, is to be a site plan review and a special exception have the requirement of a landscape architect. And in some cases, a botanist or biological specialist. And I would rather see the money be spent on the professional than the money be spent, our taxpayer dollars spent trying to have the ZEO officer determine whether a tree died or, that kind of thing. So I'd rather, work towards the holistic goal and intent and, environmental causes that we're trying to champion across the town. That being said, I think the thing why I was having such an issue with it is, and here's a good example, because what's a significant tree? For example, what's the size of a significant tree? They're telling us it's over 15 inches. When I first started my profession, or even now, I would have thought instinctively it was 24 to 30 inches. I went on to Chat GPI, and I can quickly read it to you because it's almost comical. It says the size of a significant tree can vary greatly depending on the various factors, including the species of the tree and the criteria used to determine its significance. In some cases, a significant tree might be measured in terms of its trunk diameter at a breast height of DPH, which is typically measured at 4.5 feet, 54 inches, or 137 above the ground. Trees with a large DPH are often considered significant, especially if they are old or a rare species. So now that's a new consideration. Significant trees can have a DBH measurements ranging from a few inches to several feet or more. For example, a tree with a DBH of 36 inches would be considered significant in many contexts, while a tree of a DBH of 10 inches might not be considered significant. However, significance can also be determined by factors such as historical or cultural importance, ecological value, or unique characteristics rather than just size alone. So there isn't a fixed size in inches that universally defines a significant tree. It depends on the specific criteria and context in which the tree is being evaluated. And that last sentence, I think, sums up the need for professionals to evaluate the context of a site and to be innovative in their approach. We're not telling architects that, you know, they can only use one material or another. We're not, you know, regulating the look that every building has to be a New England vernacular. Why are we getting so specific on 6-foot evergreens to provide screening when you could provide a perfectly suitable screen by building a 4-foot berm and adding a rhododendron on top of it, or, you know, or a fence, and I think that's where these regulations start to limit and suppress, you know, the innovation of design professionals. And, you know, and I can tell you, I'm very frustrated that I just see landscape architects brought in so late in the process to just plop a few trees down when that's not what we do. I mean, I can have done grading plans and detention basin design and done low impact development. And if we champion all of those goals and get the right professionals in earlier on in the design process and require that, I think we're going to be seeing much better solutions, you know, along the way. And instead, I think what's happening is we've had a few frustrating projects where the developer didn't do what he said, or, you know, and I think developers get a bad rap because, you know, I work with a lot of different developers, and I can tell you that, you know, they're as environmentally conscious as the rest of them. And, you know, when Shirley was noting the article of 100% native, I was like, that's great that company did that. But did they do that because they were required to, or because they had a good sustainable ethic in their culture? And to me, the education and the culture is what we're trying to create in these regulations, not that we're to put a 6-foot tree to screen headlights, because in a few years we might need the police to be able to see into that property or what have you, you know. So I think everything's got to be done on a case-by-case basis, and these should be guidelines and recommendations, and there should be a fluidity to allow movement away from them, you know. And so, you know, I mentioned the question about the significant tree. I certainly think that, you know, when you bring it down to the level that these regulations have it, it just makes it harder and harder to write the regulation around if somebody takes a tree down or this or that. And, you know, I mean, I would rather see it on the plan and the landscape professional come up with a better design solution to begin with, you know. And if that means relaxing the parking requirement or building a retaining wall to minimize grading to protect a grove of 12-inch trees, you know, I think that's significant. If it's one lone significant tree in the middle of nowhere, then maybe there's some, you know, way to mediate that and do planting elsewhere on the property. But I think, you know, that's a case-by-case scenario. You know, and the other thing I walked away with today, you know, with the idea of native plantings, and, you know, it's not native or exotic. You know, exotic plant is, you know, like a topiary or something. You know, there's a lot of just standard plants that may not have originally been native prior to the, you know, indigenous prior to the 1600s when development came, but they're still functioning in the landscape. They're not, you know, impacting the environment in a negative way. And I think, you know, if as a commission we can provide some latitude to say, you know, these plants are also good even though they're not particularly native, you know, I think that's helpful. But the way I think about native plantings on any project, regardless of size or scale, is the questions I ask are, I'm looking for, is there water on the site? Is there a river? Is there a wetlands? Is there an upland review area? Is there a mature stand? Those are areas that I want to keep contiguous with indigenous native species and build on that and provide an edge to protect that area and, you know, grade in a way to stay out of those areas, to keep those areas expanded as much as possible. Obviously, we come against, you know, bulk regulations and the objectives of the building and the parking and those needs, you know. And as we get into those areas, I'm less concerned about whether it's native or indigenous. You know, if it's the middle ground and it's an open area, yeah, maybe 50%. You know, it's not against the most, you know, natural areas, but not at the built area. You know, maybe you require 50% in the middle ground. You give the professional the option to do what's right for the parking lot and the building and the foundation, and based on their sustainable, hopefully, approach for not just the site, but also for the building construction and building materials and lead architectural examples. You know, we're not writing regulations that, you know, tied the hands of the architects to try to be, you know, design more lead oriented buildings, right? But here I feel like we're writing regulations that are tying the landscape architects' hands of what they can do and they can't do. And really what they need to be is empowered earlier in the process to have a say in the grading, to have a say in the drainage, to have a say in the retaining walls and those areas in conjunction with the developer, so that the developer hopefully builds appropriately for that area available to them, right? Because isn't that really what we're trying to find the balance of? You know, how much development is enough? How much natural, you know, natural native, you know, environmental resources can we protect? And then where's that middle ground of, you know, maybe it's a built environment, maybe it's a living wall, right? Maybe, you know, maybe it's a planted rooftop. Maybe there's a lot of things that can happen if innovation is allowed to flourish, right? So I think, you know, those are some of my general takeaways from the regulation. I know I've kind of talked about a lot, but that's kind of where I'm at. I'll stop now.
Thanks, Marcy. I appreciate that. Okay. So that, I mean, in terms of what we're going to do on this, again, the sort of options are that we adopt as is, we play with it, take out things, amend it, or we just start over or don't adopt it at all. That's what I'm trying to get a sense of, because that's going to determine what we're going to do for this meeting and further. And as I went down there, you know, I'm kind of listening to people. I was sort of in the category, let's adopt something, but I'm interested in changing things that are in there. But you know, realizing that there has been a lot of investment in it, you know, by volunteers, and there's been a lot of public hearings, and there's been a decent amount of letters from the public too. So I'm willing to do something. So I was put myself in that category. Fred, I thought you were saying that you prefer really not going forward with this. You had a question about the process itself, that there weren't enough, you know, from the development community perhaps involved. So that I got your take as to say, if you had to vote among which of these are going to be, would probably be to, you know, the technicality would be to deny it, or, you know, deny it without prejudice. So, you know, to, you know, work on it further, maybe with more people involved. So I put you in that category.
That's correct.
Joe, I mean, you said it was mushy, too important to push through. I kind of put you in that category too, but I don't know. You know, you can correct me. Joe Bayuso, you were more up in the air. You had some questions about it, so maybe you could adopt something, but you had some questions you wanted to know more about, so put a just question mark by you. And Marcy, I think you were probably saying more in the we need to look at this further. We wouldn't adopt this if you're going to that paradigm. What I heard you saying, Marcy, is that, and I get this, that landscaping is sort of sui generis. It's not like setbacks where we have a rule, you apply it everywhere. If there's a rule, the rule is you get a landscape architect in there early and let him do his thing. and I get that. I get that's why we, frankly, in some of our applications relied on this landscape design stuff just as a too important element of subjectivity in this. It is hard in some ways to fix rules in landscaping. I think, you know, parking is also a little bit in that category, but not quite as bad. I think of the category when you think of regulating uses and whatever, landscaping is one of the more ones where you want flexibility. So I put you though in the category, perhaps, you know, we don't do anything with this. So because that's what we got to decide. do we, go through and say, let's take this out or whatever, or do we just say we don't do that, or we, recommend, we deny without prejudice, get a more comprehensive group, and perhaps someone on this commission can be part of the group that reviews the whole thing further or something like that. So let me just, with that sort of summary, let me go around and let's do this again and see where we are. Fred, comments?
I would deny it.
Okay. Joe Chadwick.
I'm on the deny without prejudice, but I would be thrilled to help rewrite it.
Okay. Joe Vayuzo.
With the situation of landscaping, there's so many variables, and I don't think we adequately came up with all the variables, coming up with rules that will apply to some things, but not necessarily everything. It's not cut and dry. It's like Marcy was saying, there's so many different situations. You almost have to take every piece of property. Can't do it 100%. What you have to take into consideration what you're dealing with. So you have to have some good latitude of flexibility there. So what I think we need to be looking at that a little bit more so. And excuse me, I'm in the favor of denying without prejudice as well.
Thanks, Joe. Marcy, you're muted, Marcy.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
So, based on the notes that I wrote today, I can't approve this. The question is whether I deny or deny without prejudice. I mean, obviously, I have a moral and professional obligation to participate on a group, right? But I do think that it's very, very important to keep like Perry and the business community involved. And I would like to have a better understanding, or at least have guidelines that flow across all land, all objectives, because I think that really is important. I don't want to pick apart the details tonight. I don't think we can. I think, Shirley has a lot of scientific expertise, and I appreciate that. And I think, we're trying to marry the science with the regulatory, and it's tricky, right? So let me put it this way. I would deny without prejudice, but I do not like the way it's written. So I would really want to see the intent and the scope presented in a fresh and more general perspective that can apply more uniformly across all zones in all situations. So it's not so confusing as to, where this rule applies and where that one doesn't. So.
Yeah, thanks, Marcy. I should point out is that I think, again, we have regulations on the book and they're there now, and they will, if we deny this without prejudice, but it's denied, they still are out there. And I think there are problems with our existing regulations. I think they need to be amended. One of which is that I think they're too constricting. If they apply to all special exceptions, one of the things this would have done is loosen some of that, so it wouldn't apply. They apply in theory to accessory apartments or oversized garages. You got to and it's because they're special exceptions. So I think, and this regulation at least attempted to fix that and modify that, and that's one thing I liked about it. So it wasn't all burdensome stuff. Some of it was relief. Harry, comments, thoughts?
Harry Smith, town planner. I'm just digesting everything people said, and it's you live in a regulatory world here with legal parameters and constraints, as well as sort of the way any attempt to deal with issues through the zoning regulations throws you into that environment. So, I mean, I applaud a lot of things that have been said in terms of particularly trying to foster and encourage innovation by design professionals and recognize that developers are trying to do something that they'll be proud of and that other people would applaud them for. When I go back to, one example being the development out at Exit 55, the old Days Inn, where, there was extra care taken with the landscaping, I think. And there was actually, I think, an award given to the development by, I can't remember what group in town. It might have been the, I just can't remember the group. I'm sorry, but I know it was out there, and then the developer received the award from a body in the town. I think Miss McCarthy was there, and it was a group I think she was involved in. And there were, as Marcy, as you mentioned, that particular engineering group had very strong presence and basically partly run by design professionals, landscape architects, and they were involved early on in the process, and I think that really showed. So I think that's wonderful. It gets very difficult to try and take those sentiments and try to put them into regulatory language so that some of the other comments made about clarity, so that a developer or a real estate agent, whoever is looking at a regulation saying, okay, how do I address landscaping? I know how to address lights and parking and stormwater management and traffic, but how do I address landscaping? And what are they going to say? Who do I have to hire to have somebody who's going to come up with a plan that the commission is going to like? Because if you have a set of regulations that basically don't have requirements, then you don't have clarity. I agree. It's very tricky to create requirements that don't hamstring professionals, or even thoughts by commissioners and comments brought out by the public, or specific characteristics of a development or a neighborhood that need to be addressed when something's before the commission. So all that being said, I'm not quite sure as a planning professional myself how I would even encourage a group to proceed, other than almost to go back to what do you want to address? Go back to the general statements made in that summary document and start with whatever group the commission wants to convene to assist it, and say, okay, what do you think is appropriate to address as a category? Do you want more natives? Do you want a number? Do you want replacement trees? Do you want for significant trees? Do you want to go with a significant tree definition of 12 inches? Do you want to do more research? But how do you take something like that definition from Chat GPT and actually it promotes lack of clarity? 12 is not perfect. It's not a perfect measurement. It's not specific or great with respect to every species or every individual tree you're talking about, but at least it's clear and it's understandable, and something that anybody can look at and find out.
We have to identify significant trees now, correct?
Right. And this regulation doesn't say, it just says a developer would have to say, look, I've got to take down these significant trees because this is where the building has to be on the site because of X, Y, Z. And we've gone through that, I think, exercise informally with developers. Said, look, is there any way to avoid taking this particular tree down? And usually if it's in the middle of the property, no, because that's where development needs to take place. But this sort of codifies that process and one of the requirements in it. So, yeah, there's a lot in here.
Can I interrupt?
Go right ahead.
So I think if you increase the size of the significant tree, but have language that might say where, 3 or more trees are within, an area or within a size, things that change relative to scale. That's why I try to start from the natural. I don't want us to start our regulations from the confines of the boundary, because it's basically an arbitrary line and lots can change. I'd rather, and I've always felt this way about wetlands too. I remember back in my career, somebody dug a farm pond in the middle of a field and it became a wetland, and there was no significant wetland feeding it or leaving it, or, like, to me, that's a less significant wetland than, when you're proposing to develop and doing grading, when you're next to a system that's, coming in and coming out. And I've seen new wetlands created from the I-95 corridor going through and the whole area, south of that, because of the way big scale Army Corps of Engineer work functions. And, so I think, and I know this is difficult, but, there's, I think, a scale way to bring it in, to regulate or not, on smaller properties. I think we need to have sort of a sliding perspective on these things as we get into them. And, well, I don't know if I've clarified anything, but I think there's way in the objectives to create rules that are still open-ended and enforceable without calling it 12 or 15 or 18, right? Because I think a standalone 12 tree that's got a terrible habit in the middle of nowhere is not necessarily a great tree, but you might have the start of a white oak that's got a beautiful habit. It's very healthy, and I think there's no room to.
No, I appreciate everything you're saying about that. It's just when that meets the world of regulations, which is where we are, it becomes, and the legal overall context, which in general, Chuck, feel free to say, contradict me, but it sort of frowns on that kind of subjectivity, frankly, particularly land use regulation context. It becomes extremely tricky to try and have a regulation that is giving somebody looking at, well, how do these regulations affect my development? What can I do? How do I get this approved? How do I come up with a plan that is going to work here? If it's really just the regulations become a statement of go through the process with a design professional and see where you end up, because the commission's still in the position of reviewing the design professional's work and commenting on it. And the public is also involved in commenting on it. And it's not exclusively the domain of a design professional. I mean, there's a lot of people that get in landscaping and love plants and everything else and know specific things about a neighborhood, for example, or how things might work, that has come out in the process. So it becomes, I think, more and more vague for a developer in terms of their understanding of how they're going to get through the process in a timely fashion and get where they need to go. So there's that struggle between something that addresses everything you're talking about and specificity, which allows the developer some clarity. And also, I mean, one of the things that was mentioned also about how individual lots in the residential zone, trying to apply these regulations sort of comprehensively. And there is certainly an impact in terms of, well, trees are everywhere. And, but the regulations, because of the nature of how the commission's powers are sort of set forth, to put every individual, but we already, for example, the regulations already differentiate so that an individual single family house doesn't need to go do a stormwater analysis. They don't have lighting regulations applied to them.
But a subdivision, right? Which is going to have
a subdivision does to an extent, really just to really the road and the amount of water that's going to end up in the road. But there's no real analysis unless it comes in for some other reason of what's the overall impact of clearing the lots and where that water is going to go. I mean, the individual lot clearing doesn't come into it unless there's wetlands involved.
Well, that's my point. We've seen applications where they're creating 4 lots and there was no landscape component because they weren't required to. And
right.
We did them a huge disservice because of, well, I mean, I don't want to comment on, there's good engineers, there's bad engineers, there's good landscape architects, there's bad landscape architects,
Exactly.
But, that's a pet peeve of mine that, stuff isn't required in that level for subdivisions. And, I know there's a number of developers out there that want to provide the bare minimum possible because of the regulation on the back end of the project, but have every intention of doing more than what they present. Yeah. And
Yeah, I think they're out there. I mean, I think there's also developers out there who, the cost is, the dollar rules, and whatever intention they may have, other forces are at work in their own, results in doing just what the regulations require.
But that doesn't necessarily bring them more money in the final result.
I wouldn't disagree with you, but that's, how I know many of them operate. So it depends who you're talking to.
Honestly, I'm not seeing that anymore. I really don't. I mean, I see there's a lot more training on sustainable design development. There's a lot more empathy. I mean, I think maybe the smaller mom and pop shops might not know better, but a reputable developer knows better. And I think if there's enough caveats to I mean, I get we want to require a certain amount of vegetation on a property, whether it has to be on the, out the road or out the foundation or around the building. That's where I get hung up. I'm not, I'm all for planting, believe me, I have no issue with that. So,
yeah. Well, I mean, it sounds like what I understand, Commission is going towards denial without prejudice, possibly. That seems to be the sense of the group. Does that sound correct?
That was my perspective. Yeah.
Okay.
That
I don't want to prolong the meeting any necessarily. I'm a little,
but
I'm happy and would love to work on this a little more. Apart from the fact that I have worked on quite a bit in fits and starts over, a couple of years now. So I've got to balance that out with other priorities as well. So where to go and how fast it could go, I really can't, say what we could do at this point.
Right. If there's a process concern, which is we don't have developers involved, then I think.
That's a comment. And, I've been involved in zoning regulation rewrites where, you had an overall group that was providing some comment from different perspectives. And that was sort of a comment group, if you will. It was more of a, comprehensive rewrite of a whole regulation.
Did we vet the regulations against some projects that we've had? I mean, maybe that's a charrette that we could do in a subcommittee.
Possibly. I mean, I will say I know you're not going here anyway, but I did take that site plan, and I think I put it in the record at the very end of the public hearing back in second meeting of September. And I counted 70 significant tree and noteworthy trees, I think.
For where?
73. This is that lot up on the sort of a little knoll across from North Branford Road on East Main Street. That was the second part, the added part of the Days Inn development where they had all the buildings and they bought the adjacent property that was primarily all wooded and had been wooded for, I think at least decades. And the idea was, let's find out for that example, as I put it in the record, how many significant trees were on that piece of property. Is about 3 acres. And, I want to say roughly, maybe 30 to 40% of the trees had to go. And if you ran that, 1 for every 4 tree replacement, that would have been about 7 or 8 trees that would need to be added. And I think there were 4 or 5 just arbitrarily proposed by the developer anyway, behind the building along the edge of the clearing, which was kind of close, but not quite there. Whether you could squeeze more in there, I don't know. That's in addition to the trees required by the parking lot and so forth. So, those were admittedly arbitrary numbers in terms of how to back off from that. So, I mean, I will ask, is there any appetite for sort of just taking some of the provisions out that I've heard a little more discussion about, the significant tree replacement, the native species requirement, or at this point, you really want it to be reworked, revisited?
Harry, Fred Russo?
Yeah.
Is it, I asked Chuck because he's our chairman. I know a lot of work is going into this on all sides. I think our commission has taken this topic very, very seriously, especially by the comments tonight. Is it conceivable to have like a moratorium on this conversation for say 6 months? It will give all of us time to recoil, including the planning and zoning office, to take a closer look. We all have the documents of the changes, and maybe on our own, when we meet again, whenever that time comes, whenever that moratorium ends, we can resume this conversation. I think what's happened is, it's everybody's kind of beaten into the ground a little bit by it, quite honestly. And I think all of us need a break from it. And I think especially you, Harry. So I'm just wondering, is it possible that we can just kind of take this, not eliminate it, but put it on the back burner, and with some point in time in the future, we look at it again, and all of us have more time after having heard the discussions, we take it up again.
Well, you certainly can do that. You can bring it up. You could just take what exists as a document as a place to start. All the issues of, a lot of them have been identified. Anything else you wanted to bring to the table, you could add to the discussion list and sort of go through it yourselves as a commission, in concert with, after some kind of reach out to other parties, come back in, look at it, and rework it and come up with a regulation that the commission wants to propose itself.
I think it was good to hear other commissioners, what their comments. I think there was a lot of different perspectives here.
Yeah.
Regardless of how whatever the consensus was, I thought there was a lot of good input. There's a lot of things that were mentioned tonight that I didn't think of. I had my own little thing I said. Joe had something, Marcy had something, Chuck had something. So, Joe had something. So I think it was a good learning process for the commissioners. We've never sat as a commission and had this discussion. This is the very first time over a long period of time. I think it would be worth for us to, like I say, put on the back burner and not say, hey, that's it, it's over, and say, let's all give this a little bit more thought. And when we all come back, we'll all kind of have an idea where other people were at least at when we had this conversation tonight, and then resume it at a time in the future.
My concern is we put it in the back burner. Frankly, you're not going to look at it until a week before the 6 months from now that we bring it up again. The thought would be, then what do? Do we start drafting our own regulations? Do you want to set? My thought would be that if we deny without prejudice, then we should get some effort of getting a more. One of the things you said is, a committee, maybe with one or two of us. I would like Marcy, and whoever else wants to be involved in it. Less than three, two people on this commission, maybe, but no more, because otherwise we got a quorum. And then get representatives from a more comprehensive thing, and then maybe that group go through and say, what do you like, what you don't like, and then maybe have kind of start over doing that way. But in other words, my concern is that if we just come back ourselves, I would like to have some of the responsibility to do it. And you're right, Fred. You pointed out that there's a lot of volunteers, including our town staff, has spent a lot of time in this. And I mean, that was partially my willingness to say, okay, we'll work with this. Let's take this, maybe take a lot of it out, but at least we'll do something, correct some of the things that are out there. But that can be done the other way as well.
I was just thinking, that we're almost in November. We'll have a meeting or so in December. We're coming to the end of the year. Just doesn't seem like the right time to try to grind something out. I think all of us could take a little rest from this. And, we have regulations in place. Nothing's going to happen. There's not going to be any disasters that are going to present itself. In all the years that, Chuck, you've been here, and Joe probably the longest, if I do so. Some way, somehow, this commission has found a way to overcome not only landscape issues, but all the issues. And we'll do that. We'll continue to do that. But when you have a commission that is reluctant to pass these particular regulations, I think it's like being in battle. You got to step back from the battle. Even soldiers get a little R&R, and then they come back again. So we could set, listen, whether it's 6 months or 2 months, or whatever. And if we do nothing, it's okay. I think we just need a rest from it. I think the staff needs a rest from it. They've got other things that they're working on, and you can't expect them to consume so much time on something that in the end is not going to pass. And so I'm just saying, let's give everybody a little rest. That's all. It's not going to hurt anything. Town's still going to be here. The regulations are still going to be in place. We can all kind of think over, maybe only for tonight, what each of the other commissioners have said about their pros and cons of what they want to do. And if it's February 1st, it won't be the end of the world, and you're probably right. The week before, everybody will bone up on it. But here's what happens. We've all had a rest from it. We've been able to step back, say, hey, you know what? Holidays are coming. This is coming. It's not going to go away. We're not going to go away. The commission's not going to go away. And the proposed regulations are not going to go away. But we could take a little rest period in between. Let's kind of get over it. And then let's come back again. And we'll be all more fresh about what we think about them. That's all.
Sure. My thought that's right. We can do a denial without prejudice and take it up. My sense, though, is that unless you have a committee or a subcommittee that's actually doing this with someone that chairs it that says we need a meeting this date and puts it on a calendar, it's just going to flow. Nothing to get done. I mean, that's just the way the world is.
No, listen, I agree with you, Chuck. I think we both agree with the same thing. We're just saying it a different way. If we were to deny this without prejudice, we appoint a subcommittee and we find whoever else is going to be on that committee. We can say, okay, on February 1st, the committee is going to resume its work. That's all I'm saying. It meets what you're saying, that you've got a committee in place. They're just not starting on October 27th. They're going to start on maybe February 1st. That's all. And it just gives everybody a little more breathing room about it. And then you begin. So you can set a time. I don't have any objection with that. I'm just kind of more concerned about not having to deal with it for the next 2 months, for example. I just think other people that there are other things that are going to come up in this season that might be a little bit more important. And so you want to establish a subcommittee, by all means. You want to set a date when they're going to convene, we can do that too. I just don't think going from this meeting to a subcommittee tonight is where it should be, officially. But that's my opinion.
Sure. Thanks, Fred. Whenever the subcommittee would meet would be up to the subcommittee. But any other comments, guys? Joe Chadwick, further comments?
I think maybe having an opportunity to sleep on some of this stuff is not a bad idea, but let's not do a Rip Van Winkle and wake up at some point so far in the future where it's we've forgotten everything. In my experience on ASTM committees, if a ballot receives a persuasive series of negatives, you generally jump on that pretty soon to resolve what the negative issues were and try to develop a structure to overcome that. But that's, this is not that dissimilar. So I would not want to wait too long to get back into this.
But a subcommittee, I think, is a very good idea, and have some people there that are from different walks of life, like Perry Maresca would be very good because he's coming from the economic and all that from the town. Maybe a developer, one or two developers, one or two. I'm not saying that many, but landscape architects. People have different experiences from different walks of life that could put in a whole array of different opinions and maybe come up with a good plan. And like what Harry was saying just a little while ago, it's very hard to put this in a regulation form for every specific situation. Landscaping, it's tough because there's variables. There's a lot more variables, much more than like you're just saying, with parking regulations and all that sort of thing. It's different. I think a subcommittee would be good, but a subcommittee would people that have different experiences in different fields would be nice.
Thanks, Joe. Marcy,
Um,
any further thoughts on going forward? You're muted, Marcy, you're muted.
I was unmuted and then muted.
Recording in progress.
We're just now recording this?
No, I think I hit pause by mistake, but I'll
Oh.
double check that.
Okay.
The BCTV is recording it anyway, so.
Okay. I do think I appreciate what Fred's saying. I actually really appreciate his perspective on a lot of things. But I have to sort of disagree with you a little bit, Fred, because, there's a certain momentum that we've got started. I think what happens in these committees is we never get enough people that are actually doing building, working in the industry. And we tend to get, we need more of the current professionals that are working in the industry, because I just always feel like a lot of these things are a little bit weighted to make it harder. And I feel like there's been an imbalance for years, and it's sort of an ongoing fight in town ever since the Costco application, honestly. And, I just, I want to see a reg like this not polarize the community. I want to see it bridge the community. And, I think we have to be innovative in the way we trust our committee to take general objectives that might not be spelling out the specific letter of the tree, but might provide some scenarios, encouraging the use of retaining walls and allowing them to be higher than 6 feet with, if designed appropriately by a structural engineer or what have you, for example. I mean, you look confused here. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to throw it right, but I'm just saying, like, to just reward developers. Sometimes those things cost more, but if it protects something, maybe there's a way to reward a developer for saving a stand of trees or doing a different kind of stormwater design but I think there's a lot of small, I hear Harry, because there's a lot of small applications that we see that are really limited by the professionalism that bring forth. And I'd like to see our regulations require them to maybe have to invest a little bit more there. And maybe I don't know.
That gets tricky too.
I know.
We get pushback all the time, believe me.
It's not an easy solution. I've done planting plans and they plant them and they look like crap because there's no maintenance, right? So
Right.
It's like I'm not sure what and the problem is I've done them on slopes that it look like crap because the original application allowed for that slope instead of introducing a wall or some of those things. And that's where I'd like to have developers spend the money so that grading's done a little bit differently. But not everybody has and I hate to pick on engineers, but they're not good graders. They don't grade things well. I look at grading plans all the time where they bring two contours in like this. The earth doesn't go, the earth doesn't walk in a corner, the land doesn't go in a corner. It evolves, and we don't go straight into a slope into, and this is what we get from the Army Corps and the engineers. And it's like, let's take the time to, make it look natural and fluid and sinuous and all those great, all those great unregulatory words that could be, those are the fluffy words I'd like to see in the regulation, because I think we need to educate the engineers to a certain degree,
Well, it's 8:30 now.
Right.
Frankly, I personally would like the time to digest a little bit of this, and maybe we can bring it up informally in terms of how the commission might want to recommend going forward. Committee, whatever. We talked about a few things that maybe everyone can digest, and we can bring it up again on the 2nd. If you, what I'm taking my direction as is some kind of draft motion to deny without prejudice at either the meeting on the 2nd or the 16th of November, whichever. So I will prepare that and do my best to put down some reasons that seem to be the consensus of the commission. So you'll have that available to act on, because we definitely need to act on this application. And then in terms of going forward, again, I think how we started this session with sort of the generalities, rather than get into specifics, maybe have a group look at, well, what is the general consensus about what do you want to regulate? And how you do it is a whole nother discussion. I think that's really the expertise of commission and staff in reaching out what other communities have done, whatever. But I think having that group, that's the subcommittee, enhanced with all kinds of other folks, whoever they may be, though I think, the applicants to this application would probably appropriately be part of that, I would think. And step back and say, okay, of the big topics and particularly the hot buttons that were, I think, part of this application, is that something, and how, not necessarily how to do that, but if there's a way to do that without creating a scenario where development on a greenfield really can't go ahead because it's too cost prohibitive. I mean, that's a non-starter. So how do we do that? But if you can do that and come up with a way that makes sense, that's sort of vetted with the development community, is that something the group wants or not? So maybe they make a recommendation back to the commission. Commission can do whatever you want to do, but at least you have that feedback from this broad brush group, which has a lot of different input. And maybe that's not something the group wants to do or thinks is appropriate, and sort of like have some feedback on all these topics that are present in this regulation and whatever else might come up as part of the subcommittee. That makes any sense? What do you guys think about that? We could talk about it again at the next meeting if you want.
I mean, a lot of the objections, there wasn't a lot of talk about the specific provisions of the regs. I mean, I raised some, but there was, Joe had some questions, but a lot of it was process and a concern, sort of general concerns that by putting something specific in, it's not going to apply to all circumstances. You need flexibility. I mean, that's Marcy's point that I see, and you pointed out, Harry, that is a systematic problem, because the idea of a rule is that it applies to everyone equally, and if you say flexibility case by case, then that's a variance world, and so there are those issues. But my thought is, yes, prepare the denial without prejudice for the next meeting, and we can talk a little bit more. But my thought also is, I like, there seems to be something for a subcommittee, maybe with two of us on, with representatives from other, the development community as well as others, and then and to keep this from just going nowhere. Why don't we just put this as an item on our agenda for our first meeting in February, just so we have it, so it doesn't get lost.
Yep. Placeholder, sure.
And after, and we can talk and see where it is, and that, that I think that's, Fred's point, we need a little break. I think that is a little break. And then we will, and it won't die. I mean, that's my concern, is frankly, when you just, because we know the world is, we've got, half our meetings go till 10:30, and so.
Yep. Okay.
Anyone else?
Will do.
Thoughts? Anyone?
Well, that's
Marcy.
I have a bunch of comments which I will bring and make an appointment to sit down with Harry, and you can incorporate them. I know they're a little late in the game, but I think as part of this process, whatever we decide as far as the detail, I think we need to take a small project, a medium project, and a large project, and kind of vet it against it. And, I know one of the reasons why I didn't pick into the detail is because I didn't have a job to vet it against, right? And it became overwhelming to say, here's one regulation, and how do I apply it at a small job, a medium job, a large job, and so that's why I personally didn't comment on it, right? So, I really need that concrete way to, and I think that might also inform the priorities of the regulation and the priorities of our goals, which might be a direct, not a statement referring to the plan of conservation and development, but really specific ways to interpret the plan of conservation and development that are practical that a homeowner could apply, or, so forth, having specific lists of, appropriate plants in what types of scenarios so that homeowners can, embrace what the town wants to do from an environmental standpoint. There's a lot of education that I think these regs could incorporate without necessarily being regulatory. Maybe it has to happen in appendix. I don't know, but I'm creating a book. I'm sorry.
That could be a whole separate effort apart from the regulations. A whole separate effort by some other, maybe another body in the town be willing to take that up and provide the material. We can, distribute it, as people come in too.
Yeah, I mean, certainly fair point. If we're going to amend the regulations, we want to know how that would impact real life, and vetting it against actual projects would show that. So that's a good point. Anything else from anyone?
I think Fred Russo, I think we should go along with your recommendation, Chuck. Put it on the agenda for February 1st or whatever the date's going to be for our meeting, and let's all think about it, consider it. If there's any other, we have that Dropbox that has all the information in it. It's accessible to everybody. If it means anything to you, go to the Dropbox and get the information again. That's all.
Great. Okay, great. Thanks, Fred. Anything else from anyone else? If not, then I guess someone will make a motion to adjourn. Harry, did you need anything? Anything else from you?
I don't think so. I think I've got the direction.
Okay.
So, I mean, at this point, deliberations continue. So you could, we'll have a draft motion. You can discuss it in deliberations on the end of the meeting on the 2nd.
Great. Okay, thanks. And nothing else from anyone? If not, then someone make a motion to adjourn.
Fred Russo, make that motion to adjourn.
Motion by Fred. Is there a second?
Marcy seconds.
Second, Marcy. Any further discussion? All those in favor, say aye. Aye. Yeah, you know what? I think I'm live. I got to do the roll call. Fred, how do you vote? I'm lost.
Who'd you call?
I called you Fred because you're.
Oh, you did. I'd say
I'm going
yes.
out of order here. I'm messing with you now.
Yes, I agree. Listen,
Joe Chadwick. Joe, you're muted. I assume that was yes.
Joe's muted.
Yes, in favor to adjourn.
Okay. Joe Vayuso.
Joe Vayuso in favor.
And Marcy.
Marcy's in favor to adjourn.
Joe is also in favor. So we're adjourned.
Thank you, everybody. Appreciate your effort.
Right.
This program was brought to you in part through the support of the Town of Branford. Watch town meetings and other videos on demand at BranfordTV.org.